that these parties, instead of trying to come up with different ways of governance in tune with their own ideologies, have not shown any particular difference per se. Even though it was a democratic system, the monarch had so much power that he could play games, and and that resulted in political instability. The monarch went away, but the deal making habits of the political parties remained, and that's why you saw all this what is called Machiavellian ways of trying to get to power continue, and political instability remained.
So I guess calling it a Gen Z versus Nepo babies thing would be a little reductive. Welcome to the In Focus podcast. This is Nitika Francis from the Hindu data team, and today I bring to you a discussion about the upheaval in Nepal. The protests happened over 2 days. First, a relatively peaceful one, which was subject to a police crackdown by the government and resulted in the deaths of over 24 people. And the next day, the outrage resulted in vandalism, arson, and fires in Nepal's parliament, the Supreme Court, media house buildings, and politicians' residences. Here to unpack this story with me is Dr. Srinivasan Ramani, Deputy National Editor at The Hindu and a part of the data team. Going by the data, Nepal is the most politically unstable democracy in the world since 1990, with 30 government tenures in 35 years. Today, we're going beyond the breaking news using numbers. What do they tell us about equality, youth anger, and the failures of Nepal's political class? And what reforms might actually make a difference? Thank you so much for joining us, Srini. As I had mentioned earlier, our data shows that Nepal has had 30 government tenures since 1990, averaging at about 14 months each. So can you give us a little background on why this is so?
It's not an easy question to answer because multiple factors have played into this political instability being a common factor ever since Nepal transited to a democracy. That happened in 1990 after the Jan Andolan, first Jan Andolan, which ensured that political parties could get into the fray, and the monarchy still had power. The monarchy still had control over the army, but parliament was legitimized and parliamentary elections were instituted. And later in 2005, there was another Jan Andolan after the monarchy had actually usurped absolute power. A lot of things happened in between, but let's not get into that. And then a new constituent assembly was formed, and a new polity emerged with the Maoists being integrated into the mainstream. And since then, you have three major parties in Nepal today. That's the Nepali Congress, a Social Democratic Centrist Party, the Communist Party of Nepal, Unified Marxist-Leninist, which is it was traditionally a leftist party, but it's more of a centrist party now, only communist in name in that sense. And the Maoists, who offer what is called a left position in the spectrum. That said, the reason why political instability has happened is partially because the support basis of these parties have fragmented the mandate, right, during every election. No party has decisively won, power or a majority, and that's why they have to depend on one of these parties or smaller parties. Smaller parties include parties from the Terai region, right? So that's one thing. So because you always have to do coalitions, and coalitions have been very malleable, that has resulted in instability. The second part is that after, let's say, an election, right, these coalitions have been so malleable that sometimes they have been bereft of principle. I'll give you an example. Before the elections were held in 2022, the current Prime Minister was just been deposed. KP Oli was the Prime Minister then. And there was a massive mobilization against him by the Nepali Congress and the Maoists, with the key election agenda being that Mr. Oli was being authoritarian, right? So this coalition actually won the majority of seats. Right? The Maoists themselves didn't do particularly well. They finished third, right? And their seat tally was among the lowest ever since they started participating in elections. What happened was the Maoists instead formed the government, even though it was the third largest party, with the support of the same Oli, Mr. Oli, whom the Maoists opposed during the elections. Right after the elections, you saw an unholy or an unprincipled alliance between the Maoists and the UML, and the Nepali Congress was left in the lurch. And clearly this was an unstable arrangement, right? Clearly Mr. Oli was thirsting to get back to power. Yeah. And for that time being, he had supported Mr. Prachanda, or the leader of the Maoists, whose actual name is Pushpa Kamal Dahal, but whose nom de guerre goes by Prachanda, right? So 1.5 years later, Mr. Oli withdrew support from Mr. Prachanda and went on to become the Prime Minister, this time with the support of the Nepali Congress. So what we saw was an unprincipled alliance that actually got back the same person to power whom both the Nepali Congress and Maoists were opposed to. Now, this is not symptomatic only of this period of governance. This has been the case in right from 2015 when power has alternated between the Nepali Congress led by Sher Bahadur Deba, the Maoists led by Prachanda, and the UML led by KP Oli. And what has happened is that these parties, instead of trying to come up with different ways of governance in tune with their own ideologies, have not shown any particular difference per se in governance, right? They have been parties of patronage and trying to get to government, get to power, and ensure that their constituents and their patronage networks are satisfied by diverting aid and so on and so forth. And that's the reason why nobody wants to be in the opposition. Everybody wants to be only in power because that's the only way for them to keep their constituents happy. And that's why you see this repeated political instability. And this was a factor even before Jan Andolan too, right? But at that point of time, the monarchy played some kind of a disruptive role. Even though it was a democratic system, the monarch had so much power that he could play games, and that resulted in political instability. The monarch went away, but the deal making habits of the political parties remained, and that's why you saw all this what is called Machiavellian ways of trying to get to power continue, and political instability remained.
So I guess calling it a Gen Z versus Nepo babies thing would be a little reductive.
Yeah, that's we can put it this way, that the younger generation wants to term these things in the way they they relate to it the most. But when they use these terms, they're essentially saying that the political class has become a new entity in itself, and whose children and whose relatives and whose constituents have benefited more from the people themselves rather than the people themselves, which is why there is a rage against the political class as a whole. That includes all the mainstream parties. It includes the Maoists, it includes the UML, and it includes the Congress in it. And that's why the framing that these people are provided is in the lingo that they are most comfortable with.
Yeah.
But this is actually an anti-elite protest. At least the first iteration of the protest, that what we saw on Monday, was an anti-elite protest. It was triggered by this ban on social media, because these youngsters are all communicating on social media, and social media is their key platform where they vent their anger, vent their frustration with the state of affairs in Nepal. And when the government put clamps on social media, clearly because they were rattled by the kind of commentary that was happening about them. Mr. Oli was apparently reading about all the negative comments he was getting. And Prachanda himself had banned TikTok a couple of years ago. So they were seen as intolerant of being intolerant of dissent, and that's why these young people came onto the streets. But they didn't make it. They didn't make the protest only a protest of, about the ban on social media. They said it was a trigger. Rather, they kept the protest against what they perceived as immense corruption and instability that these political actors were responsible for.
So while it's impossible to do so, I just want to take out the political element for a second.
Okay.
Our data is showing that 15 to 24-year-olds in Nepal, among them, unemployment is at 23%.
Right, that's quite high, yeah.
Which is double the national average.
Right.
So I want to understand how this plays into the rage.
So Nepal, you have to understand what kind of economy you are talking about when it comes to Nepal. Nepal has traditionally been an agrarian economy. It's a fledgling democracy of sorts, where landed elites used to control power for a very long period. In the 19th and 20th centuries. Only of late, new industries such as services industries have come to the fore to employ more people. And Nepal's HDI indicators were very low. I mean, when India became independent, for example, Nepal's literacy rate was barely in single digits or just about double digits. It was that bad. So it only after a long, first during the monarchy period, some reforms took place. Then when democracy came about, more reforms happened and so on. Only then Nepalese started moving up the social and economic ladder. But that said, because there was little diversification in the economy, it's an economy that is dependent a lot on aid, right? Foreign aid. and foreign aid routed through government agencies, and having immense corruption is a problem. And because the economy is dependent on A, agriculture, and B, services, productivity is not that high, right? And so when the youth get educated, they are not finding any avenues for productive employment here, then that's why they have to move out, right? Or even those who are not educated, because of the low productivity, the opportunity for jobs is low. There are some structural reasons also. Nepal, for example, its topography is complex. So you have the mountains, then the hills and inner hills, and then the plains, right? Most of the agriculture is concentrated in the plains, and terrace farming in the hills, and then you have the difficult terrain in the mountains. So industry is almost virtually absent, right? In such a scenario, what happens is, because the government sector and the service sector dominates the economy, most of the economy, or most of the population, is concentrated in the Kathmandu Valley, right? And there is over pressure on the Kathmandu Valley to deliver jobs, service jobs, and so on. And clearly, it's not possible if you don't have a diversification of the economy, and that's the reason why many of these youngsters have moved away, because there is so much unemployment there. There's no point, trying to make a living in a place where economic opportunities are, meager, and that's why you see a big out migration in Nepal. You said it right, that you can't take the political angle out of this. This is why you see this rage, right? Nepal went through so many upheavals. You had upheaval in 1950, which removed Ranakasi. You had the upheaval in 1990, which removed absolute monarchy. You had the upheaval in 2005, which converted Nepal into a republic. Okay, so these political upheavals have happened, but has there been any substantive economic gain out of it, or in the form of bettering of livelihoods? That's a difficult question to answer. It has not been to the expectation of the young generation in Nepal. Nepal still has immense potential. It has a huge potential in hydroelectric energy, and it's untapped. There has always been talk about tapping that resources through investments, and through basically foreign investment. But because of this instability, investment again doesn't come to countries where there is so much instability. You get aid, foreign countries do dump in aid here, but aid is again something that doesn't really convert into anti-poverty or creating jobs. It might, be some kind of a succor for a country which is least developed, but it doesn't really result in structural changes. That has to come from within, right? And for that, you need a dedicated political class which is working towards economic reforms, bringing change, and so on, which this set of leaders, KP Oli, Sher Bahadur Daiba, and Prachanda, have failed to show that leadership, or the ability to bring about those reforms for the benefit of ordinary Nepalis, and which is why this has frustrated a lot of young Nepalis who are born just after Jan Andolan too, or during that time. And their expectations, and the parents' expectations also was that something new will come about, which has not happened, and that explains the anger.
So, have there been no reforms within Nepal? Because from what I understand, 1 in 4 Nepali men have migrated, and 33% of Nepal's GDP comes from remittance, which is basically money sent over a long distance. So, have there been any steps taken towards reforming Nepal from within rather than depending on migration?
So clearly not, right? If you look at the numbers, and recently our colleague Vignesh and myself, we actually crunched the numbers to look at what percentage of households in Nepal are dependent on remittances. And I have been following Nepal for quite some time now, and I knew that a significant number of Nepalis have migrated out of the state. But to see that 77% of households are dependent upon remittances that's a huge number, right? Now, clearly, the young people feel that the prospects in Nepal are so poor that they have to migrate out of the country.
Yeah.
Now, whether whether migrants, whether remittance driven economy can actually help shore up the economy in some sense, because you are getting money from outside the country, and whether that can be put into productive activity. yes, that could possibly happen, provided the government is capable enough of doing so. And again, that ties to the political aspect, right? You can't take the politics out of the economy of Nepal unless you have a dedicated a visionary government that or a consensus on economic reforms and delivery across these political parties. Despite their shenanigans, despite their contestation, at least on the economic front, they are all united on working towards working towards economic reforms. This problem will persist, and the youth, and rightly so, feel that the political class, as they see now, is incapable of taking this forward. And I agree with them, but I won't say the entire political class is problematic. It could be that these three people, these three leaders, KP Oli, Sher Bahadur Daiba, and Prachanda, they should shoulder the most of the blame. Mr. Daiba and Mr. Oli, for example, played very little role during the second CA, during the CA elections, or during the transition from Nepal from monarchy to republic. During the time, the Nepali Congress led by Girija Prasad Koirala, the Maoist ideologue Baburam Bhattarai, they played a more vital role, and civil society. People talk about political parties and Gen Z protesters now, but civil society played a huge role in 2005 when the then King Gyanendra had asserted absolute power. It was civil society who came on the streets, forced the monarch to give up power, and then laid the stepping stones for the political parties to come up with a peace agreement. International forces also played a major role. The Indian government at that time played a very important role during that time to facilitate this process. And that's how the Constituent Assembly came about. At the same time, it should be remembered that these two people, Mr. Daiba and Mr. Oli, who were then part of the Congress and the UML at that point in time, they were actually opposed to anything changing the status quo. They were not in favor of greater state restructuring or federalization. They paid only lip service to this transition from monarchy to republic, but they, by opposing a progressive constitution, they built a constituency for themselves, and they were the ones who were responsible for the dilution of the constitution that actually came about in 2015 after the second iteration of the Constituent Assembly. And that was also facilitated by Mr. Prachanda's own transformation from a radical Maoist leader coming from the hinterland, and whose photograph was also not available, who wanted to change the system and bring about socialist transformation. He became one among the many political leaders in Kathmandu who has also been accused of massive corruption and lifestyles that belie his political background and his history as a political leader. And he became he became like any other political leader who was dependent on patronage to keep his constituents happy, his partymen happy, and no reform came about because of that. So you can't take the politics out of the economics.
Yeah.
Both are interrelated, but the trigger for the anger is one, the social media protest and the situation that Nepalis find themselves. 50-20 years ago, many of the Nepalis used to live in India, right? It was not as if they were not migrants then. They used to live in India. Now they are migrating to the Gulf and other parts, but the scale of people, scale of number of people who leave the country in order to find livelihoods has increased dramatically, and that is something that ordinary Nepalis feel the pinch of, having those families being separated and so on, and that and they relate that to the dysfunction that they see in the polity.
So I can understand that this situation has led to this level of rage, but why specifically to the point of burning the parliament building or ministers' houses and things like that? I want to understand who is behind these. What do you think of this particular situation?
So when the first protest happened on Monday, when the youth actually turned out, who called themselves Gen Z protest, when they came onto the streets, they were demanding two things. They were saying we are opposed to corruption and we wanted a reinstation of the outlets which have been banned and so on. And some tried to scale walls, get into this thing, and there was a crackdown and quite a few people died. So immediately that resulted in rage and more people came out to the streets. But what happened then? They went on to burn parliament, that is Singha Darbar. They went on to burn the houses of the politicians of all parties, including those who are opposed to the current regime, right? Including the Prime Minister, the Home Minister, the party which was supporting the Nepali Congress was supporting Mr. Verba was attacked physically. His wife was attacked. Jalanath Khanal, the former Prime Minister belonging to the breakaway faction of the UML, his wife was almost burnt to death. We were all apprehensive whether she lost her life. Thankfully, she didn't. And then Baburam Bhattarai, who actually supported the Gen Z movement, his own house was burnt, and he and his 96-year-old father escaped death by 15 minutes. Then they went on to burn the Supreme Court. They went on to burn documents. And what did they do? They went on to free prisoners. One prisoner was a high-profile, politician of the Rashtriya Swatantra Party named Ravi Lamichane. Mr. Lamichane is an outsider from this. His party. He's a a TV media personality whose party made a mark in the 2022 elections. So he was practically an outsider. But once his party made a mark, they were the fourth largest party in the elected parliament. They went on to almost follow the policies of the other parties. And then there was a case of corruption or embezzlement in which there was this man was indicted and he was put in prison, and he was freed from prison. Not only was he freed from prison, hundreds of other prisoners were also let out by the protesters. And the Nepali army took control and started taking steps to bring peace only late in the night or the next day, right? And it's not as if it's difficult for them to do so. All of this the court, the Singha Darbar and the residences are all within 2 to 3 kilometers in Kathmandu. So if the army wanted, they could have stopped this from happening, right? And interestingly, a lot of these Gen Z protesters, I forgot to add one more victim. Kantipur, which is the largest media organization in Nepal, which also hosts the English newspaper Kathmandu Post, excellent newspaper, coming from us different journalists, excellent newspaper. Their offices were burnt, right? And the servers were burnt, and therefore the site was brought down. And the Kathmandu Post editors still brought out the print edition. Kudos to them. My appreciation to for what they did, and they had to revert to reporting from Twitter or X, right? So why were these institutions targeted? And Gen Z protesters themselves on Facebook and other social media were actually condemning these attacks. They are saying, no, we are not responsible for this vandalization, this arson. We are not responsible for this, and we don't endorse this. So who doing this? One benign way of looking at it is that just because 20 young people died, the youth lost control and went on to attack these places. But the choice of these places, which includes the Supreme Court, which includes a media organization, and not just politicians, but also civil society, people, members of civil society, that suggests that this is not innocent. And the fact that the army took so much long, that has to be investigated to actually, finally, bring control, tells me that this is not innocent. There are others who are trying to make hay while these protests have happened. It could be that there are some regressive forces, anti-democratic forces, anti-social forces, and there are many in Nepal. Mind you, this is a country that transited from a feudal monarchy to democracy, and there were always remnants of the past who were opposed to this transition, who were never happy that Nepal had become a republic. And mind you, in the last year, there have been protests that have asked for the return of monarchy, right? Which essentially means doing away with the constitution. There have been protests which have been calling for the Hindu Rashtra in Nepal, and these are interrelated. And these forces didn't get the purchase that the Gen Z protesters got on Monday. They also tried to, wreak havoc, destroy property, and so on. But their protests were sporadic and didn't get the same amount of popular support that the Gen Z protesters did. And I suspect that an element of this arson, vandalism, fleeing prisoners, and so on, is only possible if such regressive, anti-democratic, counter-revolutionary forces have actually taken part in this protest as well. This is not proven. This is just my theory. Reporters on the ground would know better. But clearly, the fact that the Gen Z protesters were themselves rattled. In fact, the next day, after the army eased curfew for a while, youngsters went to the ground and they cleaned up, places which were burnt and charred and so on. That tells me that the youngsters did not expect this kind of a conflagration to happen, and those who are responsible for this violent for this violence are not necessarily looking for reforms or a positive change, but there could be people who are actually opposed to democracy itself, who have been responsible for these acts. I call them violent nihilists.
So, is there structural change possible? Is there reform, institutional reform that could help? Or is there some part of the political culture that has shown any change over the past few years?
So, one problem that was debated during the Constituent Assembly itself, but unfortunately couldn't get expressed in the final constitution, was what kind of political system should we have? That was a one debate that the Nepali people had. They institutionalized proportional representation to some extent, right? And a lot of the Nepali constitution is a progressive constitution. They have reservation for women. There is a certain degree of federalization that allows for greater representation of minorities and so on. But they didn't take it to the logical conclusion, in the sense that federalization was finally done in a way that the dominant hill communities were given their pride of place in almost all provinces. So that was how the borders were drawn. When it came to governance, initially they were talk about, because you have to go back to understanding Nepal's history. So between 1990 and 2005, there was this constant tussle between the monarchy and the elected government, right? So while the elected government was elected from the will of the people, the monarchy still enjoyed tremendous power, especially like control over the army and so on. And this dichotomy in power also resulted in some kind of stasis. So some constitutional experts during the constitution writing process suggested that Nepal should instead go for a presidential system, a directly elected president who is accountable to a parliament, right? But that didn't fructify. The Nepali Congress was particularly opposed to that, because they feared doing something like that will give rise to strong leaders and who might even upend democracy again, which is a legitimate fear. But I feel, considering what has happened so far, and because fractured mandates have only resulted in the same set of people again coming up with the unprincipled alliances and so on, having a elected presidency could probably have mitigated this problem. There could be deadlocks, right? The parliament could have deadlocks, and there could be power deadlocks and so on. But at least this kind of stasis, this instability that is inbuilt in the system, could have been averted if Nepal had gone for a presidential system. So these are questions of constitutional reform that can be explored in this moment. But before that, the most important thing is they need peace, number one. Then the question is, who rules in this interim period before elections? Obviously elections have to be called. Now the question is, already there is talk about some people from civil societies names have been thrown up in the air, and therefore this leads us to understand where this is moving. Is it going the Sri Lanka way, or is it going the Bangladesh way?
Right.
In Sri Lanka, after the Aragalaya protests, interim government was formed, but that interim government later gave way to an elected government, in which a marginalized or marginal political player came to power. In Bangladesh, the mainstream parties were sidelined, and one man from civil society was brought in with immense popularity or stature, but elections have still not been held. You see democratic backsliding in Bangladesh. Now, is that the direction this has to go? Then it is problematic, right? Nepal has a functioning constitution. The politicians might have failed the constitution, but the constitution is still intact and it's proper. So if the interim government is formed on a constitutional basis, and Baburam Bhattarai, one of the architects of the constitutional, the Constituent Assembly, has come up with a valid solution to this, and I agree with that. He has asked for at least one sitting of the elected parliament, who would then come up with an interim government of sorts, who would then lead to who would then call for elections, and that election will bring about change. That's the way forward, rather than nominating someone out of nowhere from civil society on the basis of the fact that they have a good stature and so on. That I think is not the right way to do it. The Gen Z protesters can also be part of this process, right? They can pressure parliament to come up with a credible interim government, which they can do, but they can't take the entire ownership by doing it in an anti-constitutional manner, and I find that unconstitutional manner. And I find that the Gen Z protesters are also saying, some of them are also saying this allowed. That we should not throw the baby with the bathwater. We can't do away with the constitution in order to bring about change.
Yeah.
But some leaders who are now being talked about, like the Kathmandu mayor, who's an independent candidate, who's not part of any of these political parties, Balendra Shah, for example, he has said you have to dissolve parliament. Now that's not right. How can you call for the dissolution of parliament when the problem is with government and not parliament? So if you have to dissolve parliament, it has to be parliament themselves should call for that, right? And so these are problematic statements being made, and I fear that if the Bangladesh direction is taken forward, then this could lead to more democratic regression rather than democratic renewal.
Thank you so much, Srini. That's all from InFocus today. We will be following up on this in forthcoming episodes and articles. Thank you.